She was bright, focused, and deeply loved by nearly everyone who knew her. But on a quiet Sunday night, Korea Miles simply vanished. No call. No goodbye. Her car was still parked outside, her bedroom untouched. Even the bath water she ran was still sitting in the tub days later. The police didn't find blood. They didn't find signs of a struggle. But something was very, very wrong. Men's clothes had just been washed. The license plates on her car had been swapped with another vehicle in the lot. And her closest friends were all saying the same thing. She wouldn't disappear. Then, while officers were still debating whether this was even a real missing persons case, a man walked up to their cruiser in the dark and said 5 words that changed everything. "I killed my girlfriend. She's gone." But what shocked investigators wasn't just the confession. It was the motive. Because buried in Korea's phone were text messages so explicit, and from someone so unexpected, it raised questions no one was prepared to answer. And that's not even the most disturbing part. Because Korea had already left behind something even more revealing, something no one knew existed until it was far too late. It started quietly. Korea Miles had been expected at work on Monday morning. She didn't show. No call, no message. Her supervisor assumed she was ill. But when she missed a second day, without contact, people started asking questions. Her phone rang once, then straight to voicemail. Friends tried texting. No response. Jaslyn Ward, her closest friend and godsister, knew something was off. Korea didn't do silence. She was the kind of woman who messaged back within the hour, who never missed work, who never ghosted her people. Kevon Dupree, her oldest friend, tried too. Nothing. Her mother, Moni, hadn't heard from her either. It wasn't just unusual. It was impossible. By Wednesday night, Jaslyn filed the report. Police arrived at the off-campus apartment complex on the south side of town, a quiet housing block mostly filled with students. The lights were on inside. The TV glowed softly. But no one answered the door. In the parking lot, officers found something strange. 2 white Malibus parked just a few spots apart. One was Korea's. The other wasn't registered to her at all, but her license plates had been placed on it. Both cars had flat tires. Both looked like they hadn't moved in days. Inside the apartment, the roommate, Toshara Grant, returned from work to let officers in. She hadn't seen Korea since the weekend. They weren't especially close, so she hadn't thought much of it. But even she noticed the odd details. The air conditioner had been turned on that day. A load of laundry had just finished cycling. 2 unfamiliar teal bathroom rugs were drying inside. And then, the bathtub. Full. Untouched. Still holding water as if someone had prepared to bathe, but never got the chance. There was no blood, no overturned furniture, no visible signs of struggle. But everything about the scene felt wrong. Her keys were still on the dresser. Her makeup bag, never left behind, was sitting zipped on the vanity. Her purse and ID still in the room. And neither of the 2 cars were drivable. If she had left voluntarily, how had she left at all? By the time officers wrapped up their check, no one had a clear theory. Some felt she'd just taken off. Others weren't so sure. There was still one person they hadn't been able to speak with, her boyfriend. His name came up again and again that night. Dion Riddick, 25, ex-athlete. Back in town just a few weeks ago. Several of Korea's friends quietly told police that the relationship had been rocky, sometimes toxic. And though no one could prove it, everyone agreed on one thing. If Korea had chosen to walk away from anyone, it would have been him. It was past 10:30 p.m. when 2 patrol officers sat quietly in their cruiser outside the Hunter Ridge apartments, still unsure what to make of the case. No blood, no body, no sign of force. But the inconsistencies kept piling up. Cars that couldn't drive, laundry that didn't belong, rugs that weren't hers, and a bath never taken. Then a figure approached from the shadows. A man, early 20s, wearing a black t-shirt, khaki shorts, and a backpack, walked directly up to the squad car. He didn't run, didn't panic. He just stood beside the cruiser and spoke. Low, flat, deliberate. "I killed my girlfriend." That's all he said. The officers paused, unsure if they'd heard correctly. But the man didn't move, didn't stutter. He simply waited. Calm. The man was identified as Dion Riddick, Korea's boyfriend, the one everyone had been trying to reach. He was immediately detained and placed in the back of the cruiser. No resistance. No emotion. And even as officers informed him of his rights, Dion didn't ask for a lawyer. Instead, he started talking. His words came in fragments. He said there had been an argument about money, about her phone, about her disrespecting him. He said she'd been acting different, talking to other people, keeping secrets. And then, without hesitation, he said it again. "She's gone. I killed her. But where?" That part was less clear. He gestured eastward, toward the far side of town, toward a place with water, a creek, maybe. Said he'd left her there after driving around all night, mentioned a suitcase. That's how he got her there. The officers didn't press. This wasn't the time. They called for backup and confirmed the scene was secure. Dion remained in the back seat, murmuring details without being asked. He hadn't just confessed. He seemed eager to offload something. Like carrying the truth was heavier than the act itself. And just like that, a case that had started as a low-priority missing persons report was now a confirmed homicide. But nothing he said that night explained what had really led to her death. Not yet. There were still hours of statements ahead. And a story to be untangled. One that, even now, didn't fully make sense. But one thing was clear. The man everyone had been trying to reach had just walked out of the dark and placed the burden of truth into police hands. At the station, Dion Riddick didn't hesitate. The moment he was placed into an interview room, he began expanding on his confession. His tone was matter-of-fact, almost casual, like someone walking through a list rather than a life lost. He told officers that things had changed the moment he came back to town, that Korea had become secretive, distant. He said he started checking her phone when she wasn't looking, and what he found, according to him, made his blood boil. Text messages, not from another student, not from an ex, but from a man Dion never expected, a married pastor. According to Dion, the texts weren't friendly. They were vulgar. In one message, the man wrote, "Why you running from this good pipe I'm trying to bless you with?" In others, there were late-night meetups, mentions of rides, promises of money. And then there was the car. The second white Malibu, flat-tired and parked in the lot under Korea's plates, had been gifted to her, Dion claimed, by the same man. He said the pastor had paid to fix her tires, covered her rent once or twice, and sent her regular transfers. Dion alleged that the two had been involved for months, and that Korea had hinted she might expose the relationship if it ever turned against her. According to him, this wasn't love. It was leverage. And Korea, he claimed, was using it. He said that on the Sunday before she vanished, they had argued. He confronted her about the texts. She laughed it off. He claimed she even teased him about being broke, about still needing help from his parents, while she had grown men paying her bills. That's when, according to Dion, he snapped. He said she started packing his things, said she told him to leave. He wouldn't. The argument turned physical, then violent. That was when he claimed to have struck her, hard enough that she stopped moving. And that's where the story broke apart. Because instead of calling for help, Dion said he left her on the floor, walked into the kitchen, picked up a large knife, and returned to the room where he then slit her throat. What he would admit was chilling, that he placed her body into a suitcase, carried it outside in the early morning hours, and left it in a dumpster near the visitor lot. Later that night, he retrieved it using his mother's van, drove east, past the city limits, past the fields, toward a winding, muddy creek. And there, in the dark, he let her go. But even as he described it all, blow by blow, investigators weren't sure they were hearing the whole truth. There were still pieces that didn't fit, details that didn't align with the clean apartment. A crime scene that looked more like a hotel checkout than a homicide. And the pastor? He wasn't under arrest. He wasn't even mentioned in the missing persons report. Until now. The sun hadn't yet risen when search teams were mobilized toward the eastern edge of the county, guided by Dion's vague confession and even vaguer memory. He didn't know the street name, just that it was near a bend, past a factory, and somewhere off East Main. But he remembered the water, and the mud, and how deep it got if you walked just far enough in. That morning, officers located the access point. A gravel turnoff led to a thin creek that ran behind a patch of trees. It looked quiet, ordinary, but about 30 yards in, the ground sloped sharply, and the current darkened with depth. Divers entered the water slowly. Visibility was near zero. With poles and gloves, they combed the muddy bottom foot by foot, searching for anything unnatural. Anything weighted. It took them just under half an hour. Submerged in the darkest stretch of the water was a large, soft-shell suitcase, heavy, saturated, wedged in thick mud. When they pulled it out, the weight told them what they already feared. Inside was the body of Korea Miles, wrapped, contained, head covered in a garbage bag. Her ID, purse, and phone were not with her. No wallet, no keys, just silence. On the embankment, officers marked the location. Further downstream, they searched for the murder weapon, a butcher-style kitchen knife Dion said he had stabbed into the soft creek wall near where he left her. But even after clearing several feet of thick vegetation, nothing turned up. Back at the apartment, forensic teams returned with fresh eyes. The initial sweep had turned up almost nothing. No blood, no foul smell. Just a faint sense that something had been wrong. But now, with a clearer picture, they dug deeper. They found faint, reddish discoloration on the hallway carpet, just barely visible under angled light. A second trace on the side of Korea's mattress. Another near the base of her bedroom wall. Bleach had been used. Cleaning rags were discovered tucked in a bag beneath the kitchen sink. The bath rugs that had been running in the washer? Freshly laundered. The mattress cover? Gone. Tossed in the complex dumpster, which had already been emptied by the time investigators checked. Everything about the scene told them the same thing. Someone had taken time to clean. Yet in his confession, Dion made no mention of it. Not the scrubbing, not the sheets, not the disposal of Korea's belongings. According to him, he acted in a blur. No plan, no cover-up. But the evidence said otherwise. The following day, Korea's phone records confirmed her device had been turned off just after 10:45 p.m. on Sunday. Before that, it had pinged repeatedly in the apartment complex. After that, it was never turned on again. And the second white Malibu? The one with her plates, but not her name? Still no clear ownership. Just a whispered link to the man Korea had once called Pastor. But for now, the focus was on the body. And for Korea's family, what mattered most was that she had finally come home. But this case hadn't finished speaking. While going through Korea's digital footprint, investigators noticed something strange in her cloud storage. A folder labeled with her student email ID had been marked for deletion, but never fully erased. Inside it was a small audio file. No title, no description. Just a single voice memo, time-stamped 5 days before she vanished. It began with silence, then the hum of her bedroom fan, and then Korea's voice, low, tired, and trembling. She didn't say who the message was for. She didn't name names, but the fear in her tone was unmistakable. She spoke of feeling trapped. She mentioned how she couldn't breathe in her own home, how being watched was now part of her routine, how even her phone didn't feel safe anymore. She didn't go into detail, but there were clear references. Someone who wouldn't stop calling, someone who shows up when he knows I'm alone, and someone else who acts like he owns me, like I'm something he paid for. And then came the final words, barely above a whisper. If something happens to me, start with Dion. But don't forget the one in the pulpit. The file stunned investigators. It wasn't a suicide note, it wasn't a threat. It was a breadcrumb, left behind by a woman who knew what danger felt like long before it ever reached her doorstep. And it shifted everything. Because now, it wasn't just about what Dion had done. It was about what Korea had feared, what she'd carried in silence, and what she may have been trying to outrun in the days before she died. Investigators took another look at her phone data. They found messages between her and the number she had saved under a nickname. Most of them were deleted, but some remained, buried in her cloud backup. Messages about rides, about money, about hotel drop-offs. One, laced with desperation and control, read, "Stop acting scared. You already know what I need from you." Another, "You said you could handle grown folks. Why you running now?" The number wasn't linked to a church contact, but Korea's close friends recognized it immediately. It belonged to Pastor Vaughn Laramie. He hadn't been mentioned in any initial report. He hadn't been seen near the complex. But now, his role in Korea's life, whatever it had been, was impossible to deny. Still, there was no proof of physical contact, no photos, no direct confirmation. But between the messages, the car, the whispered voice note, Korea had already told investigators everything they needed to start asking the right questions. When Pastor Vaughn Laramie was first contacted by police, he kept his responses brief. He denied any inappropriate relationship with Korea Miles, denied giving her money, denied gifting her a car, said she was just a member of his church choir. Nothing more. He insisted that any texts from his number were likely due to confusion. According to him, Korea had been involved with someone else during a choir trip to Mississippi. He claimed she saved that man's number under his name in her phone so that Dion wouldn't get suspicious. A deflection tactic, he said. Nothing unusual. And at first, investigators had nothing solid to push back with. No witness testimony, no hard evidence of physical involvement. But then, another case surfaced. A few months after Korea's death, 3 teenage boys from Pastor Laramie's church stepped forward. Each told a separate but disturbingly similar story. They alleged that the pastor and his wife had used their authority, both within the church and the school district, to exploit them. They were groomed, given money and transportation, and coerced into silence. One boy mentioned being allowed to drive a car the pastor claimed to own. Another said he was promised help with college applications. One described being told God wouldn't forgive gossip. Text messages were collected, photos were traced, and eventually charges were filed, not just against Laramie, but against his wife as well. The case shook the community. The same man who stood behind the pulpit every Sunday was now facing charges of sexual coercion and pandering. As word spread, so did connections between Correa's case and these newer accusations. Laramie maintained his innocence. His lawyer called the claims an organized attack, but the evidence was mounting. And then came the plea deal. In February 2023, Pastor Laramie accepted a deal to avoid trial. He pleaded guilty to a felony count of using a vehicle to facilitate unlawful acts, specifically transportation sex workers in exchange for favors. He was sentenced to 1 year in county jail. Most of the more severe charges were dropped. In court, he gave a statement, not of remorse, but of resignation. "I'm not guilty of what they accused me of. I took the deal to protect my family. This isn't a win for them. This is just the end of something that never should have started." But for Correa's loved ones, it wasn't about what he did or didn't admit. It was about the pattern, the power, the manipulation, and the fact that someone so many had trusted had walked right through the same shadows that Correa had once whispered about. Alone. Laramie served his sentence quietly. By the time he was released, his church had closed its doors. The car he once claimed belonged to his wife, the same Malibu linked to Correa, was never legally proven to be his. And yet, the damage remained. For investigators, the plea didn't change Correa's case, but it clarified something they'd long suspected. She was never the only one. Dion Riddick was set to stand trial for first-degree murder in just 3 days. But on a mild fall morning, during a routine hour of outdoor recreation at the county jail, Dion made a move no one expected. He was on the soccer field with a handful of other inmates when he abruptly stopped, glanced toward the fence, and sprinted. He cleared one 15-foot security barrier, then another, this one topped with barbed wire, and finally a third, wrapped in razor wire and separating the facility from the nearby business district. Officers gave chase, but Dion was gone before anyone could react. His orange jumpsuit was found discarded just beyond the fence line. For 37 minutes, he was a fugitive. He was caught less than a mile away, trying to flag down a rideshare on a side road. When questioned, he claimed he wasn't running to avoid trial. He was trying to protect his family. Said they'd been receiving threats, but no evidence ever supported the claim. He was charged with felony escape and returned to his cell. By then, Correa's family had already endured enough. Her mother, Monet, pushed for closure without the pain of a public trial. And when the state offered a deal, second-degree murder in exchange for a guilty plea, they accepted it. In court, Dion stood before the judge and made a brief statement. There were no tears, no justification, only a line that hovered between regret and detachment. "I can't explain what I did. I just want to say sorry." The judge didn't hold back. He reminded Dion of the violence, the cleanup, the deception, and the cowardice that followed. He spoke of the future Correa would never see, the dreams she had just begun chasing, and the fact that Dion had treated her like something to be discarded. Then came the sentence: 25 to 40 years for the murder, an additional 17 months to 4 years for the escape. No parole, no guarantees. Outside the courtroom, her brother spoke to the cameras. "We're okay with the sentence, because my sister is okay with it. She always believed in hope, in people, even in him. And I think he has to live with that more than any prison ever could." There was no cheering, no applause, just a family broken by loss, and a quiet acceptance that justice, however imperfect, had finally arrived. Correa was buried beneath a headstone that read, "Loved hard, lived loud, left too soon," And while the world moved on, her voice, captured in that short, trembling recording, remained. A warning no one heard in time, but one the world couldn't ignore.